Hello, and welcome to or welcome back to How to Change the World, the podcast that equips change makers with the insights, tools, and inspiration to drive meaningful impact. I am Catherine Alonzo, and today I am joined by two incredible, amazing members of the Javelina team. David Waid, one of our co-founders and the VP of political campaigns, and Justin Plumb, political strategist. I am so thrilled to be joined by both of you. And what we're going to be talking about today is trends, what's new, what you're hearing about in the world of politics and political campaigns specifically. Really inspired by the fact that the two of you just attended the Pollies, which is the prominent award show of the political consulting industry. And I was really interested to pick your brains about what you heard and some of your takeaways, and thought it might be a really great opportunity to share it with our incredible listeners. So thank you both for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So Justin, let's start with you. What was what were some of the themes or key takeaways that stood out to you from the Poly conference?
So first off, the Poly conference was kind of weird because it was a bipartisan conference. So there were Republican consultants who were taking an absolute victory lap and celebrating the whole time, and Democratic consultants who were dejected and sad and concerned about the state of the world the whole time. So it was a little bit odd. And you'd go to the panels and there would be, both Democratic and Republican consultants, they're sharing their findings and their learnings from the 2024 election, which I think was really valuable, to hear from both sides of the aisle of, evaluating their own campaigns and the opposing campaigns and talking about what worked and what didn't. And I particularly enjoyed hearing what some of the Republicans talked about, on their winning campaigns, and how they really focused on people, meeting people where they are. We saw really heavily in some of the polling that Republicans did really well with people who don't pay close attention to the news. And those are huge swing voters. They're younger, more likely to be people of color. And so one of the things that people on Republican campaigns talked about a lot was meeting those people where they are. So they talked about podcasts that have been in the news. One of the things that really stood out to me is one of the panelists talked a lot about doing a lot of advertising during sporting events, because it's something that people who don't follow politics watch a lot. It's also one of the few places that you have to watch ads. It's a live sporting event. Like, you do have to wait for the timeout or between quarters or whatever it is to watch the ads to get to the next event. And that was something that was really effective to him. And a lot of times when Democratic campaigns were really focused on, exactly targeting the right voters, and those mediums like sporting events are broadcast. They go to everybody out there, and we're wary to spend money on them. But that's one way to really reach these people who, aren't as targetable and don't pay as close attention to the news, and is a place to meet them.
David, how about you? What stood out to you from the Pollies?
Well, there are a couple things. I think that, I guess really the primary standout for me was AI. And artificial intelligence and how it's impacting what everybody is doing. It's interesting. I think people are still wrapping their heads around it. I don't think that anyone's got it figured out, but it's clearly a thing that is coming, and in many respects is already there. But it touches on so many different parts of what people at this conference were doing. Right? It's everything from finding clients, right? But also it goes to targeting. It goes to like rapid fire analysis of feedback that's coming into the campaign, whether it be, feedback that you're getting from the field or, mini polls all over the place. It's a way of really moving faster than we normally could. And I think both sides were really paying a lot of attention to that.
I'm really curious about that because AI is certainly touching every single one of our clients and our business, more and more with every passing work day, it feels like. And my experience in the past is that political campaigns can sometimes be a little bit slow to adopt new technologies because you don't have as much room for risk on a political campaign. Like, when you only have one shot to lose or win, it can be scary and risky to try something new. And I think a really good example of this is digital advertising, that the big campaigns, so presidentials, federal races, Senate, Congress, those picked up digital advertising pretty quickly. But local races were really, really slow to advertise digitally. Like, I think we only really saw local races across the board do digital advertising in this last cycle. And I think one of the reasons for that is because there's less risk appetite and less opportunity to spend money on things that might not translate into votes. And I'm curious what you two think about that same idea as it relates to AI. Are political campaigns going to take risks and try new things, or are they going to stick to what they know has been effective in the past?
Well, I'll bet, like your previous example, it's going to depend on the size of the race and the stakes of what's involved. I think for national races, and not including any of the federal races, people are going to dive into AI because they can't afford not to. Going to be a thing, whether we like it or not, and you can't just let that advantage go to somebody else. You have to figure it out. Now, it's going to be tough, and there's going to be a lot of false starts, and I think that AI is going to be nowhere for several cycles for down ballot races. So for exactly what you laid out with regard to digital, it's a lot to learn. There's a big steep learning curve. You only have so many things that you can do and so many resources you can spend. And so, using them on the tried and true kinds of things. I mean, at this point, we look at some of those down ballot races. I mean, this is actually, you see this on the big ones too, but just the amount in which people are still really putting a lot of time and attention into road signs and yard signs, right? The technology definitely takes its time catching up.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I suspect is that probably for this coming cycle, how much AI is impacting how work is done on campaigns is going to come down to leadership. So those that are leading consulting firms and those that are leading campaigns, campaign managers, and how much are those individuals incorporating AI into their own work patterns and therefore creating cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what AI can do on a political campaign is very similar to what it can do in any kind of business. Is it can create efficiencies of scheduling, efficiencies of outreach, efficiencies of ideation. You can do things like build a website or develop a logo much faster, much cheaper. And so it's going to come down to how much are individual leaders embracing it and creating campaign teams that are centered around AI practices.
I think the one thing political campaigns do need to be wary about with AI is, on a political campaign, you're dealing with a lot of proprietary confidential data, whether that's voter data, donor data, phone numbers, emails. And when you put something to AI, you give up ownership of that, and the large language model learns from what you put in there. And so developing a policy for your campaign, if you're a leader on a campaign or a consulting organization, about, all right, here are the things that we should use AI for and encouraging it. And here are the things that we legally and in the best of interest of our clients cannot do, will also be really, really important. Is lay out that policy so that everybody in your team knows what to and not to use AI for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Justin. So let's zoom out and look just at the political landscape right now. And, our lens is the Democratic side of the aisle. So we commiserate with the political consultants you were describing, Justin, who maybe had their tail between their legs and a lone tear trickling down their cheek. What is it that you're seeing in the political landscape, and particularly the campaign landscape, that others might be missing? David, you want to go first?
I would say I'm going to give two answers to this. One is a sort of short one, which is, I think, authenticity. One of the things that I see every person out there who is a consultant is saying authenticity. It's totally important. And then when you look at their work product, honestly, it's kind of not there. And so I feel like actually giving the time that it takes to create authentic messages that really reflect the core of this person so that people really understand who it is that they get a chance to vote for. Right. I think that's one thing that I feel like, it's not like I alone in the entire universe have spotted this thing, but it's surprising how many people have not spotted that. And the other thing I would say is I feel like a thing that happens in politics, and you see this all the time, but where if it usually swings around presidential elections, right? If Republicans do well, then there's a whole slew of stuff that frankly, I feel like Democrats take a step back and retreat if they say, okay, this is a Republican thing to say. We're not going to say that, right? And I would say that in this current time frame, populism is a thing that the Republicans have embraced. Really, just Donald Trump has embraced populism. And I feel like Democrats are sort of pulling back from it. And it actually drives me a little crazy because this is, in fact, this is Democratic home turf. And by populism, I don't mean the populism of Father Coughlin, who was a notorious racist in like the 1930s, kind of populism. I mean the kind of populism that, you see really anybody can come forward with it. But two sort of obvious examples would be AOC and Bernie Sanders. I think they have definitely, because populism fundamentally is about like talking to ordinary people about the things that they care about and talking about the fact that there are elites who are getting in the way. That's really what populism is. And so that's not something by any stretch we should be abandoning the field to a billionaire on. And so I think that's something that Democrats should be leaning into. And in fact, by the way, there is no path to the White House if we don't, because all of those states that formerly were the blue wall and no longer are, they're all states that are about that.
Go ahead, Justin.
I completely agree, David. I think there's been a little bit more of you see post-election when we lose, you have folks on the left who say, well, if we were more left, we would have won. And you have folks in the center who say, well, if we were more center, we would have won. I don't think that either one of those answers are correct. I think it is more about having a candidate who is authentic, speaks to what people want to do. And I think you can do that from both the left and the center and the middle of the Democratic Party.
Well, and that leads me really nicely into my next question, Justin, which is one of the questions that has been thrown around globally since the election is what are Democrats doing now? And there's this pervasive narrative that the Democratic Party is a complete mess and that there's no leadership and no clear direction forward. Justin, what's your understanding of the state of the Democratic Party now, and what do you think is the path forward?
I think the Democratic Party is kind of a disaster right now. And the kind of source of this is you see polling of where ordinary Democratic voters stand, and Democratic voters are divided. There are some Democratic voters, a significant portion who want a more leftward vision. There are some that want a more moderate vision, and those two groups of people are pretty split down the middle. And so there's not sort of a unifying coalition that is leading the Democratic Party. The one thing that basically everybody agrees on, though, is they're not happy with the leadership of the party. Left, center, and everywhere in between. I think the way we've seen some members of Congress who are really old and unfortunately dying this year is just angering this sense within the party that there's a desire for new leadership, a new crop of people to come to the top and take over the party. And, we're just not seeing that yet. And personally, I don't think that we're going to see that until the 28th presidential election. That is where the party's going to decide who our next round of leaders is. And there is no telling right now who that's going to be. But I think there's going to be a sizable portion of the party who just wants somebody new and fresh. And we haven't had that for basically 3 cycles in a row. We've gone with the most experienced person to lead our party into the election. There's a desire for something new.
David, I'm curious, not to call you old, but you've been involved in the Democratic Party for a long time.
Nice intro. Good.
Have you seen something like this before? This sort of Democratic Party down and out and this wide sense of disaster, or does this feel familiar?
I think either party, and this is a little bit more extreme than usual, but I think either party, when you lose the presidency, there's this soul-searching moment where it's frustrating. This is a thing of having seen it so many times, right? That I now recognize that all that sort of post-mortem stuff that goes on, there's stuff that's incredibly effective that went on, but because it was part of an overall campaign that lost, people are like, that's a disaster. We should never do that again, right? And there's also then all the crazy fakakta ideas of people who are like, oh, we should do this new thing, right? Even though no one knows if it actually is going to work. And maybe it's just a completely harebrained idea, but by God, we should try it, because the old way, everything about the old way was a disaster, right? There were no redeeming qualities whatsoever to it. And so I think you see that every 4 years, the Republicans had it when they're out. We have it when we're out. I think that, what exacerbates it now is just the extremes that Trump is taking this world to, right? And so consequently, everything has become extreme. Like, your reaction to it is far more extreme than, God forbid, remember when George W. Bush was like the most conservative person on the planet. And now, what a joke. We wish, right, that he was the most conservative person on the, and he probably, actually, in fairness, I think conservatives would say Donald Trump is no conservative, but whatever. He is what they've got, and he is what they've foisted upon us.
So, do you think that Democrats have a messaging problem, a strategy problem, or both, David?
I would say it's a messaging problem. I think that the populism aspect of things, honestly, is really essential. Oh, and by the way, I meant to say, actually, to what Justin was talking about before, that we've seen polling recently that said that, okay, it, easily acknowledges that there's this group, cadre of people on the left, a cadre of people who are sort of more center left, want, pro-business, et cetera. The more recent polling, though, shows that what primary voters are looking for isn't, that ID is not the main thing for them. The main thing for them is, are you a fighter, right? So it doesn't matter if you're a fighter for to somebody on the left, if you're a fighter who presents well, who is a fighter from the sort of center moderate place. Fighter is the piece, the most defining piece that people are looking for. And so I think that in terms of, this populism piece, again, I think that's something, for me, I think this is something that Democrats really need to own and never let that one out of our hands, because it's completely made up that the Republicans are actually not the elitists and actually looking out for the interests of the ordinary person in this country. So that's not something that I think we can ever sort of concede that ground. But I will say that the messaging either gets determined to a certain extent by maverick candidates that come out and just make it happen, Bernie being a classic example of that, right? AOC, or the messaging nationally, the messaging gets done by money, right? And it's by the people who are giving in really big chunks of money to think tanks and to big independent expenditure committees, et cetera, right? So that's how that message is coming out. Well, guess what? Those people who are doing those kind of contributions, I love them, by the way, massively appreciate them, because none of what we are doing would really be possible if we weren't able to go toe to toe with a lot of the money that's coming in the Republican Party. But sadly, those are people that don't know what it means to have to scrounge together coins to be able to run their clothes at the laundromat, right? Or who have to worry about making their mortgage payment that week or that month, or filling up their car and they can only fill up a quarter tank because they can't afford to do more. Like, that's stuff that never comes into their head. And so I think it's really hard for that group that's funding a lot of the messaging to wrap their heads around what needs to be said, because it's not their lived experience.
I actually think it's neither a messaging nor a strategy problem. I think it's a branding problem. Strategy wise, I think Democrats ran a great campaign. The drop off in terms of support from 2020 to 2024 was really not terribly unchanged in the swing states, but there was a massive fall off in the sort of safe states, red or blue, which shows that we ran a really good campaign. And we were not really that far off of a world where Kamala Harris wins the Electoral College and loses the popular vote, because we were just that good in the swing states and did that poorly in the states where we were not focusing our strategy and marketing and attention. And similarly, the Harris campaign, when they put out their ads and their messaging, it was incredibly populist. It was all talking about how Donald Trump was a billionaire and looking out for the rich and the wealthy, like Elon Musk. And meanwhile, Kamala Harris was looking out for ordinary people. And these messages were often told by, people who look like union workers, iron workers, that sort of thing. And I think we ran a great campaign, and we shouldn't shy away from that. I think the problem is a branding problem of the Democratic Party, that voters believe that the Democratic Party is elitist, that it doesn't look out for ordinary people. And it's kind of true some ways, because the Democratic Party has become a party of wealthier, college educated people. Having leaders that have been in the establishment for so long contributes to that brand. And there's a sense among voters that Democrats don't stand up for ordinary people despite their messaging because of this sense of their brand, that they're more focused on some of these social issues that were not as important to people who are trying to fill up their gas tank, right?
I think that's really interesting. Go ahead, David.
Well, I was just going to say, this shows, it's actually fascinating. I think it's a conversation Justin and I have all the time. I think ideologically, we are both 100% in sync on the fact that we want to win campaigns. And that's the thing. And then it's interesting. I feel like I'm kind of like a weird bundle of different ideologies. But essentially, I would say that Justin and I are separate a little bit on the left to moderate spectrum. And so you see a little bit of that right there. I mean, I would say that the branding is a perfectly fine way of talking about it, but the branding also comes from messaging that has been inherent to the party for a long time. So the two are, to me, are kind of inextricably linked in many respects. And I also think that the Democrats, I don't know. I just feel like it's, going back to that authenticity, right? Are we authentically representing the needs of workers in Detroit? I don't know.
I think there's some amount of it that it is out of the control of the politicians. I think some amount of it is not, that it's not our politicians who are pushing the cancel culture that's become so unpopular with these voters. It's your Aunt Karen, who's a left-wing person on social media trying to cancel people, right? It's now like, it's the ordinary rank and file people who are part of the party who are changing the brand in such a way that the politicians have no control over. Even if they run the most message disciplined campaign and avoid those things, that's the brand of the Democratic Party, because it's who a lot of Democratic voters are and people see them in their lives.
Well, I think it's an interesting point, because one of the things I was thinking about as you guys have been having this conversation is Hollywood. So I think Hollywood has always been more on the left side of the aisle, right? But since Donald Trump has appeared, any Hollywood event you watch, it is just so unified against Donald Trump and Republicans, and even a show like SNL, which historically has made fun of politicians across the aisle, has really, sometimes when you watch it, it feels like Donald Trump versus SNL. Like, it stops being political satire at some point and starts being this like really central value system. And I've always been really supportive of that, because what Hollywood is saying aligns with how I feel. But it does build into this narrative that these celebrities who are millionaires and near billionaires, some of them, and have lives that are not at all associated with the everyday person who is struggling to buy eggs and fill gas tanks. It does reinforce what you're saying, Justin, that those people who have really railed against Donald Trump for nearly a decade now aren't necessarily reflective of that normal everyday voter.
And I think it comes off as preachy, especially in those types of events like you're talking about, the Hollywood award shows or SNL. And I think voters, they just don't want to be preached to, especially younger voters who all they know is the Trump world. They maybe voted, their first time they were 18 was 2016, and that may have been their first election. They have only known Trump. And to them, Trump is normal. Trump is the Republican Party. If you are an older voter, you remember a time before Trump and when the Republican Party was different, and maybe you could make a case for both sides. And nowadays, young voters see them as equal parties, and it just seems preachy if you just want to watch SNL for some laughs, and you get that. You get a lecture on who to vote for.
Right. I want to ask you guys about trends that you're seeing in campaigns and what you're anticipating for the 2026 election. But before we do, we're just going to take a quick break. It is such a tough time for nonprofits, agencies, and changemakers. Funding is tight, capacity is stretched, and your work matters more than ever. And you need communication support that can keep up. That's why we are super excited to introduce our new suite of modular, flexible services, built to help you and your storytelling stay visible, resilient, and connected when it matters the most. Whether you need a quick messaging refresh or adaptable on-demand support, Javelina is here to help you move forward with clarity and strength. You can see this list of services and discounted prices at javelina.co/rapid-response-services. That's javelina.co/rapid-response-services. Okay, so let's talk about what trends you guys are seeing in political consulting and campaigns right now, and some of the things that you're anticipating that we might see going into the 2026 midterms. David, how about you?
Well, trends, I don't know that these are necessarily eye-poppingly new things, but that's sort of to my point, which is it doesn't always have to be some new thing, right? Like I was saying before, it's almost like after elections, it sort of reminds me of The Life of Brian, a Monty Python movie, where it's like these people are sort of talking about who's the real prophet, and someone will be like, follow the sandal. And then someone else is like, no, follow the gourd. Right. And I'm like, that's what it sometimes feels like with the like, do this, do that. I actually think that the winning trend, as I see it, is authenticity and connecting to emotion. And I think those two things are it. And that's so much easier said than done. But I think that that is really where it lies.
Justin, how about you?
I agree with that, David. I think we're entering a very different world in the 2026, midterm cycle. So far, there's been, 10 or 15 special elections for different state legislative seats around the country. And on average, Democrats have run 20 points better than Kamala Harris, results in 2020, which, spells a lot for who is energized and who's excited to vote in the upcoming 2026 election. And it's a very different electorate than voted in the presidential year. It's lower turnout. It's more people who are higher information voters, and those folks they voted for Kamala Harris and they voted for Democrats. And so I'm expecting this to be a really strong cycle, and those folks are more excited than ever. I know we saw just this past weekend was the big No Kings protest across the country, and hundreds of thousands of ordinary people in towns all across the country showed up to protest Donald Trump and the way things have been going the past 6 months or so of his administration. And there's just an energy around anybody who wants to come out and be bold against the administration right now. And I think it spells well for Democrats to be able to run against something so strong and so repulsive to these kinds of voters.
I think that the one concern I have, and I feel like we've all seen this before, but basically, I think if you look at the ideology, Republicans almost always fall behind. If you were to poll on each one of these issues, where Democrats stand on those issues. But what they do is they find those really high octane, divisive issues that they use as wedges to split people off. And so then that's where you get stuff regarding the trans community and bathroom usage, right? Like, I mean, it's stupid stuff that affects literally nobody really, but it's what they use as wedges. And they do it on everything, right? They've done it on defund the police, because actually, as it turns out, middle-class voters and even poor voters want to live in a safe community, right? And so they can use that as a wedge to split off people that we should be getting, because in every other respect, these people are getting screwed by the present administration. I guess there's another way that we're different, Justin. I'm apparently a glass half empty kind of guy. I'm just worried. What is their new wedge thing going to be? Because they seem to be genius and have an unlimited capacity for coming up for evil devices to split people up.
And are there new tools or tactics that you've heard about or you seeing being used that you think are especially effective, or even that they're overrated?
I think that there's a little bit of a reckoning with the way Democrats have run campaigns in the past. I think Democratic campaigns have been a little bit more analytically inclined and more focused more into hyper targeting than Republican campaigns. And I think that's lended us a lot of benefits, but it's also given us a lot of downsides. If we're missing a lot of voters who cannot be hyper targeted, we're missing the big shifts in the electorate. And instead of trying to get the most sort of views and impressions for our dollars. And the result of that is that when you just try and get as many views and impressions, you're reaching the people who are online all day, terminally online scrolling, and you can get lots of views of those people. And you're missing the people who don't pay as close of attention, don't watch as many ads, because they're just more expensive to reach. If you're just trying to be the most economically efficient, reaching the most voters, you're going to avoid those people. But those people are exactly the people we really, really need to reach, is the people who are really expensive to get to. And so sometimes you just got to throw out cost efficiency out the window because you've got to reach those people.
Here's one thing I am not sure we have learned as a party, and I'm curious what you two think about this. And I'll explain it through the lens of a personal story. So in 2016, when Donald Trump was opposed by Hillary Clinton, the morning of the election, which I fully anticipated would be the day that the first female president was elected, I was listening to the news on the radio, and they were interviewing various people about how they felt about the outcome that night. And there was a woman somewhere in the country, and she said, I really hope it's going to be Trump, and I really feel in my soul like it will be, and I'm just so excited about that. And out loud, I was like in the house on my own, and out loud, I spoke to this woman on the radio, and I said, you're deluded. And however many hours it was later, 10 hours later, it turned out, in fact, that I was deluded. And the thing that I vowed to myself that I would stop doing was sort of dismissing, judging, making fun of people that felt spoken to by Donald Trump and his followers. And then I did, even though I vowed to myself that I would stop doing those things, I didn't stop doing those things. And particularly after he was defeated by Biden, I think I did more of those things and just assumed that he was, kind of gone. Did it all the way again through the next cycle, and really had to consider, when am I going to stop judging this person and this movement that to me is so abhorrent and makes no sense, but makes a ton of sense to a lot of people, the majority of Americans as of election day last year. And I still don't think that the Democratic Party are figuring out how to do that. And I just see it creating problems for us moving forward, because even if Trump isn't on the ticket again, this same idea of connecting and resonating with people is going to be on the ballot again. And I just am concerned that that's a lesson we really haven't learned. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I think that that's right on. To me, that's that disconnect that I see between Democrats' way to talk with exactly those people and listen to those people and not immediately dismiss them. Now, when I say those people, I'm talking about the people that are persuadable, right? There is a certain group of people that are, honestly, they are wackos and they are off the grid and they will never be on our side, right? Because these are the people that really are motivated by white nationalism or, whatever, right? So there is definitely a chunk, and it's a surprisingly large chunk in the sort of Trump coalition that fits that profile. But there's also a lot of people, and that's the people that actually decide the elections. And that's the group that we have to reach. But I would also say, I think that, you can't sort of lump it all into one thing. Because in presidential elections, when turnout is so high, you do have to talk to all of these people and you have to connect with all of those people, right? In elections where turnout is super, super low, suddenly that targeting approach and maybe turning out your base, can be enough to win the election, right? It's the big elections that I think are flummoxing us. And I don't know where the moment came, and maybe Justin, you can have an opinion on this, but where it used to be that Democrats used to say, if there's high turnout, we win. Now it's been flipped on its head, right? Like we want low turnout in order to win. Where did that happen?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that I've really learned over the last few Trump cycles is that there is a segment of, the electorate that almost never votes. They actively avoid politics. They actively avoid the news. And in today's sort of fractured media environment, you can do that pretty easily. You can avoid the news and just focus on, your family or the entertainment that you follow pretty easily. And for those people, the reason they do it is because they hate politics. They feel like the system is rigged in some way. They're really dissatisfied with the status quo. So they just want to pay as little attention to it as possible. And Donald Trump speaks to those people. He is somebody who came in to, he has this massive celebrity already coming into it. And he comes in, just destroys the Republican Party. They actively tried to stop him, all the never Trumpers, and he came in as a change force for the party and for ultimately the country. And for that group of people, he spoke to them. And we see in the presidential elections, when he is on the ballot, there are people who come out and vote for him and leave the whole rest of the ballot blank. They vote in no other election. They don't even vote in any other races when Donald Trump is on the ballot. And it remains to be seen if Republicans can do that again in a world post-Trump. If there's anybody else in their party who can do that. And we as Democrats definitely have not figured out how to reach those people. And in some ways, I think Democratic consultants and the people who work in the Democratic Party are the worst people at figuring that out, because there's nobody who is more interested in politics than the news than people who work on Democratic campaigns. And these people are the complete opposites in terms of the TV they watch, the music they listen to. All of their consumer patterns are very different than the people who work in politics. And sometimes you just have to step out and put yourselves in their shoes. And that can be a hard thing to do.
What is something that each of you wished that more people understood about political campaigns? Justin, you want to go first?
I think this is a great question. And, one of my thoughts is I think there's sometimes, voters, especially primary voters, are kind of armchair strategists sometimes. And they will try to vote in primaries for who they think is the most electable. And they can be very wrong about it, because it goes into their preconceived notions about the world as it is. And the biggest factor in that, I think, is we try to win the last election instead of the current election. And I think there's all these learnings that we're getting from 2024 that just do not apply to 2026 because it's a midterm, because Trump will have been in office for 2 years, and the world is just a different place than it was 2 years ago. I think there's still things to learn from it, but I think most people need to learn that this is a new election with a new environment, 2 years of change, and to sort of handicap some of the things that we learned from 2024 and think of them within that context.
David, how about you?
I would like people to know that if they care a lot and feel so motivated, that we, despite all the craziness, still live in a democracy. And what that means is you can run. And most people don't think they can, right? They think of all of the obstacles and all of the reasons why not, right? And really don't understand that clearly everybody else who gets into the race is overcoming those obstacles. It's not like it stops anybody. And, I wish more people would sort of think about it that way, because generally what happens by default is that there's somebody maybe 4 blocks away from you who's a schmuck and who has not thought through all of the downsides of running. And so they're going to be the one who's on the ballot. And the people who are particularly conscientious about it are not. So I would love people to sort of lean into their power a little bit more, because it's there. It's oftentimes unrealized.
Which leads me really nicely into my next question, which is, if there is anybody out there listening who has thought about running for office, be it in the next cycle or one day, what is the advice that you would give them?
I think my advice would be surround yourself with people who know what they're doing. That could mean hiring a consultant to work on your campaign. you may not have the money for that, in which case that's not even an option, or you just might not want to do that. But I think that then in that case, you need to make sure that you are surrounded by a kitchen cabinet of people who know what they're talking about, who've done it before multiple times, and who can give you really good, solid advice. So that means everything from how you sort of set up your committee to what is your messaging to who are you targeting and how, what channels essentially are you using to reach people and why. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. It's not really like immediately obvious, a lot of things, but that doesn't mean they can't be overcome. Again, every single person who runs for office has overcome those challenges, right? So what you really have to do is just surround yourself, as I say, with smart people.
Justin, how about you? What advice would you give to people considering a run for office?
I would say just be unafraid to go out into your community and meet the people around you and hear from them, ask them questions and make asks of them. I think in the world that we're in, they're simultaneously lacking meaning and community connection. They're afraid of those sorts of things, but they have a really deep down longing desire for it. And if you can sort of get over that initial fear and try to build something and ask people to be part of it, I think people will be so excited to be a part of changing the world and trying to create a movement or supporting your campaign or your cause or whatever you're fighting for. It really takes one person to sort of start the ball rolling for everybody to kind of pile up behind you. So don't be afraid to be the first one. And there might be a little while where you're the only one rolling the ball, but once you set that example, people will follow if you make the ask.
That's great. I love that advice. When it comes to political campaigns and democratic politics specifically, what is giving each of you hope right now?
I think for me, it's that I actually think the fact that we are arguing over populism, right? Like that's a battleground is hope because it centers normal people, the people who do all the, to paraphrase George from It's a Wonderful Life, all the people who do all the living and breathing and dying and working. I think that's good, that should be the battlefield.
I think people are more unafraid of making big changes than they have in the past. People are unsatisfied with the status quo, and in many ways, Democrats have defended the status quo in the institutions. And now, after 2024, there are more and more people who say, no, let's just get this done. Let's actually make the change. Don't go through all these processes. Let's really change the way we think about this issue. Things change the way we govern our cities, our states, and our country, and change the way that we fight and talk and things like that. That there's more of an eagerness and openness to risk and new adventures.
I love that. Well, one of the things that's given me hope is very smart, passionate, driven people like each of you who show up day after day, cycle after cycle, with a really strong belief in the vision for the world that we share, and knowing that wins are to be celebrated and failures are to be learned from, no matter how much they hurt. And so I think finding people to work alongside that has that shared vision is what keeps me going. And I'm grateful to each of you for being those people. Thank you for this incredible conversation and for sharing all of your insights with us. We'll have you on again throughout the cycle to sort of check in and see how it's unfolding.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And thank you for listening and for joining us. It has been such a fantastic conversation. I hope that you have taken a lot away from it. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would so appreciate it if you would leave us a rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. It really helps us grow the podcast and reach new listeners. And until next time, when I cannot wait to share another story of change with you, I hope you have a great one.